What is your life really worth? Is the pharmaceutical industry really interested in your health and well-being? Does the pharmaceutical industry actually care if you live or die? Can you trust them and your doctor with your life? The coronavirus pandemic will generate hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars for the pharmaceutical industry and its investors, and many millions more for those companies who make masks, antimicrobial products, diagnostic equipment, etc. While most people around the world have experienced lockdowns and restrictions that have crippled thousands of businesses and many businesses to close permanently, this has happened because of advice by medical experts given to governments. While many people are on the verge of bankruptcy, the pharmaceutical industry will be enjoying future profits like they have never seen before. Now let's take a look at some statistics from Statista. This is a company that is trusted by Google and other high-profile companies. As you can see on this graph, the steady increase in profits for drug companies from $390 billion in 2001 to $1.25 trillion in 2019. Take Pfizer for instance. Due to the COVID-19 vaccine, a vaccine developed by Pfizer and the German bio company BioNTech was the first COVID-19 vaccine widely approved by the national health authorities. Now, Pfizer is the world's third largest pharmaceutical company based on prescription drug revenue, with a market capitalization of around $200 billion. Now let's venture into the dark side of the pharmaceutical industry. And to do that, we need to visit the Violation Tracker. Violation Tracker allows you to discover which corporations are the biggest regulatory violators and lawbreakers throughout the United States. This is a service by Good Jobs First. In 2013, the US Library of Congress notified Good Jobs First that the library would begin permanently archiving the content of Good Jobs First's website as a historical important public policy record. Now, Violation Tracker is the first wide-ranging database on corporate misconduct. It covers banking, consumer protection, false claims, environmental, wage and hourly rate, safety, discrimination, price fixing, and other cases resolved by federal regulatory agencies and all parts of the Justice Department since 2000. Now, when you bring up Pfizer in the Violation Tracker, you can see that it has total penalties since the year 2000 of $4,712,210,359 US dollars. Now, some of these offences were health-related offences, safety-related offences, environmental and false claims-related offences, and off-label, unapproved medical products, and kickbacks and bribery. Now, when you look up AstraZeneca via the Violation Tracker, now when it comes to AstraZeneca, you can see that their fines totaling since 2000 were $1,148,775,284 US dollars. And they have also received the fines for healthcare-related offences, employment-related offences, government contracting-related offences, False Claims Act, and also kickbacks and bribery. Now let's take a look at this drug, Roaccutane, also known as Accutane. This drug is used predominantly by teenagers for the harmless condition of acne, but the effects of this drug are far from harmless. Roaccutane has been responsible for causing birth defects in a way of facial deformities, including cleft palate and other facial deformities. Now, Roaccutane has also been responsible for many teenage suicides. Yes News reports acne drug Accutane side effects is death, so why is it still on the market? Now, the Daily Mail reported a story where the parents said, "We can't get our daughters back, but we can warn others about this acne drug." These are the voices of two bereaving mothers who share their story of their 15-year-olds who took their own life while taking the drug Roaccutane. One mother goes on to say, about 8:30 p.m. on the evening of Wednesday last year, Annabelle Wright appeared to be a typical teenage girl, popular at school, revising in her room for a Spanish exam and chatting excitedly with a friend who had just confirmed she would be joining her in a family holiday to Spain that summer. But then, to the shock and horror of her family, the 15-year-old killed herself in her bedroom in their family home near Yorkshire. Annabelle had no history of depression, and her death came entirely out of the blue to the closest friends. Her parents are convinced that their daughter was suddenly overwhelmed by suicidal feelings brought on by Roaccutane. She had been taking Accutane for a period of about 6 months. And here is the second tragedy. Courtney Morris, 15. She took her own life just 4 weeks after prescribed 40 milligrams of Accutane twice daily. Now in 1971, Roaccutane was being tested for a skin cancer treatment, but it was also noted to be a cure for acne. And researchers also noted it could cause birth defects. But in January 1982, the Dermatology Advisory Committee suggested the FDA approve Accutane, but also to change the label and warn that it causes birth defects. And since Accutane's release, it was making in over $700 million in sales annually. There were 12 deaths recorded in 2019, 10 by suicide, whilst taking the drug Roaccutane. Now let's take a look at the drug Vioxx. When 500,000 Americans died and nobody noticed, was the US drug Vioxx responsible for far more deaths than has been acknowledged so far? With a TV ad budget averaging $100 million per year, Vioxx swiftly became one of Merck's best sellers, generating over $2 billion a year in revenue. 25 million Americans were eventually prescribed Vioxx as an aspirin substitute, thought to produce fewer complications. There was a far amount of news coverage after the recall, but pretty slim considering the alleged 55,000 death toll. A class action lawsuit dragged its way through the courts for years, eventually being settled for $4.85 billion in 2007. Scientists from Merck manipulated the results of the clinical trials in the favour of Vioxx to hide any evidence that the drug increased the patient's risk of heart attack. They did this to increase the likelihood of FDA approval. In January 2005, the Associated Press reported the FDA scientist David Graham stated that the number of Americans who died or were seriously injured by Vioxx is 139,000 and not the original FDA estimate of 28,000, or more widely reported 55,000. Now, when the drug Vioxx, an anti-inflammatory drug that caused over 55,000 deaths in patients, the FDA stated and put on their website the following: 55,000 deaths. Well, that's the price you pay to get a good drug on the market. After the Vioxx scandal came to light, there was a lot of unrest at the FDA amongst employees. As you can see, Lester Crawford resigns as head of the FDA. The US Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Lester Crawford resigned Friday, a little more than 2 months after he was elevated from acting commissioner. During his 3 years at the FDA, Crawford was at the centre of numerous controversies, including a decision to withhold the contraceptive Plan B from over-the-counter sales despite FDA staff approval for selling the drug without a prescription. The head of the FDA's Office of Women's Health, Dr. Susan Wood, resigned in protest. Critics called it an example of the politicisation of science by the Bush administration. In March 2004, the agency added new warnings to popular antidepressant medications, including Prozac and Zoloft, because of evidence the drugs could contribute to an increased risk of suicide. In November 2004, Merck & Co. pulled its painkiller Vioxx from the market amid reports its increased risk of heart attack and stroke. FDA employees publicly complained repeated warnings of safety problems had either been ignored or actively suppressed by their superiors. Now, the former head of the FDA, Lester Crawford, was fined $90,000 for failing to disclose conflicts of interests. Now, Lester Crawford was fined over $89,000 and sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation and required to do 50 hours of community service by Judge Deborah Robinson. Last October, Dr. Crawford pleaded guilty to 2 charges, failing to report that he and his wife owned shares in companies regulated by the agency and filing false financial reports. I have endeavoured to show that there is no real service of humanity in the profession of medicine, and that it is injurious to mankind. Mahatma Gandhi. It may be very interesting to note that when doctors go on strike, mortality rates drop significantly. As we can see in the 1960s, when Canadian physicians went on strike, mortality rate dropped. Also in Los Angeles in the 1970s the mortality rate dropped. Physicians went on strike in South America. Later that same decade, mortality rate dropped. Now, physicians have gone on strike 3 different times: in Israel, in the 50s, 70s and 80s, and now in the year 2000. In all 3 occasions, the mortality rate dropped. And on 1 or 2 occasions, the mortality rate dropped by 50%. Now, Dr. Carolyn Dean published a book called Death by Modern Medicine. Now, this book is full of useful information and it's available free on the website. I'll put the link in the description below. Now, you really need to take control of your own health and not rely 100% on the doctor and modern medicine. Modern medicine is great for emergency medicine. When you're injured in a car accident, putting you back together, they are brilliant at doing this. But modern medicine has very poor outcomes when it comes to treating chronic conditions, and most often the treatments are as dangerous or even more dangerous than the condition they are treating. Now, these medicines are highly profitable. The compounds cost some of them even just a few cents to a couple of dollars, but the drug companies sell these for tens to hundreds to even thousands of dollars. Now, Hippocrates, he was a physician back in the 400 BC era. Now, Hippocrates' medicine was governed by, first, thou should do no harm, and secondly, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine.